This is Will Buchanan reporting for the Walk for Liberty.
This is part 2 of the video for day 97. In part 1 of today's video, I talked about how Montana is probably not a very likely candidate for independence from the federal government because Montana is very dependent upon the federal government, i.e. because the state and its residents receive many more dollars from the federal government than they give to it. And that I believe one of the main reasons for that is the amount of farm subsidies that Montana residents receive from the federal government. I have noticed that there seems to be a disparity in general between people in western Montana and people in eastern Montana. Western Montana is more mountainous and so probably doesn't have as many farms. Many of the people I met there seem to be more liberty-oriented, in part, I'm sure, because they didn't feel that dependence upon the federal government.
When I was talking to one lady about the Walk for Liberty and telling her about New Hampshire, she even commented, "Hey, that sounds a lot like Montana."
As we've been heading more into eastern Montana, though, I've noticed a different story. Now, more often than not, when I tell people about the Free State Project and the efforts of its participants to reduce the size of government there, they seem strangely quiet, or at least not nearly as enthusiastic as many of the people in western Montana were about reducing the size of government. As one example, there was the rancher who came up to me on the four-wheeler, who I think I mentioned a few days ago. When he questioned me about what I was doing, and I told him about my desire to reduce the size of the government,
he kept responding, "Uh-huh, uh-huh."
I'm sure he wasn't too keen on reducing the size of government, since as a farmer and rancher, he might receive a lot in subsidies from the government. But why are farm subsidies even necessary in the first place? Many would argue that farming and certain other industries, like oil and now airlines,
are so-called essential industries and need to be supported and protected by the federal government.
But do they really think that without the federal government supporting these industries, that people wouldn't be able to eat, or drive their cars, or fly from place to place? That's a ridiculous assertion, since people will always demand those things. And if for some reason they stop demanding one of them, the federal government shouldn't be supporting that industry anyway then. But as long as there is demand, there will always be someone in the market who supplies that need. But to focus on farmers again, it could be that without the federal government supporting them, that some American farmers might not be competitive enough to stay in business.
But if that's the case, why should I be supporting them through money I paid in taxes? Many people go out of business all the time.
Plus, there's no shortage of people in other countries willing to sell food to Americans.
But then again comes that essential industry argument, i.e. that it's important for most of the food to be produced in America,
in case the rest of the world gets ticked off at Americans and decides to stop selling food to them. But that's a pretty ridiculous argument as well, since then they would lose lots of money. But if somehow, in some far-out scenario, everyone in the rest of the world got upset at Americans and decided to stop selling food to them, why do you think that would be?
Perhaps because of the meddling the U.S. government has been doing in the majority of the countries around the world?
So this is yet another example of the government trying to come up with a solution to solve a problem which it itself created. The U.S. federal government has been meddling all around the world, creating ill will, and worries that other governments around the world might decide they've had enough and want to take revenge on Americans. Therefore, in an effort to prevent Americans from starving,
which would, of course, preclude them from giving the federal government the tax dollars which it so desperately loves,
the people in charge of the federal government have decided to subsidize farmers so that at least there would be a food supply inside America.
It's nice how that works out, huh?
I didn't reach my goal today, but I did break yesterday's record and walked about 20.25 miles. Unfortunately, I think I started too late in the day to make reaching my goal realistic.
Here are my GPS coordinates.
This is Will Buchanan for blog.walkforliberty.com, signing off. The grasshoppers have been crazy here the last couple weeks. Possibly it's some kind of grasshopper mating season.